Welcome to the free class Hot Wheels Racer, getting started with Unity game design. Let's jump into this. We're emailing out a free gift pack as well as some coupons. And just to kind of get an overview of what to expect in this class, we are just getting your feet wet. It's supposed to be your. And a quick intro with some steps for game design. This is not a step-by-step for everything, but just kind of getting your feet wet, right? Quick intro. What's typically better for students, right, is having the coaching or mentoring with someone to ask questions to, having all the resources in one spot, and steps to make multiple games and build your confidence and troubleshooting skills. So, getting started, we want to install the Unity Hub off of the website. It is free, but it can be a little cumbersome. I'm getting used to that, but when you go to download Unity, you've just got to go to the student and personal version, and it'll show that it's free. But keep a lookout for a different video for installing Unity if you're looking for some tips and tricks for that. But after you install Hub, you can install the Unity engine with Visual Studio. So it's a checkbox that you've got to select that it installs Visual Studio. Any version is fine. Whatever comes with it is usually typical. It's just easy to check that and get it going. So it's kind of connected with the Unity engine. And then the third part would be to create your game project. So let's jump into that. With the new version of Unity Hub, this is kind of a breakdown of what it looks like. We're going to select 3D Core. We're going to name it Hot Wheels Racer, and we're going to save this to our desktop. Now, you could save it wherever, but you do need to know where are you saving your project, because it's going to create a folder called Hot Wheels Racer, and that's everything where our files are. Knowing where your project is saved at is going to be really important in case you're backing up your project, you want to move things into it or edit it with Windows, as well as moving the project. So then we're going to create that project. So what does that look like? So here I have Unity Hub, and this version looks like there's another update going on. So they change the look of this ever so often. So we go New Project, and here you can pick your editor if you have different versions of Unity installed. So most likely, if this is your first time, you're only going to have one version, and that's fine. We'll do 3D Core, since we're just doing 3D. It's just a core. There's all these other templates. I mean, we could also select Core or however they're organizing it nowadays. And then again, we'll name our project and save it to our desktop, and then we'll do Create Project. So that's going to load. And while that's loading, on the website, Your Creative Destiny, you can go to the free class, or under classes, you'll also see, besides other options, you'll also see a free class here available as well. We do several promotions for free classes throughout the year for different pieces and aspects of it. But here we have the Hot Wheels Racer Unity package. And this is, you can literally just click this. This Unity package is kind of like a suitcase with a bunch of files in it. We've got some audio, some 3D files, some 2D files of artwork, all in here, which is all free. You can do whatever you'd like with that. So when you pull it up with Google Drive, or when you click the link, it is going to show this weird structure here. You just ignore that and just download the file. Now, once Unity is open, and depending on which browser you use, there's a couple different ways you can go about opening a Unity package. But the first key here is to make sure that you have Unity installed. So here once you've downloaded it, and mine, it's just showing up right here. So I can go to the folder, and I can double click it, come back to Unity, or depending on which browser you have, if you can see the downloaded file, we can also just drag it into our project window down here at the bottom, and that will pop that right in. So when we get that, it's going to let us know we have a bunch of new files, and we can click these arrows, and you can see there's a bunch of different folders here. And the scene gives us a warning because in our scenes folder, we have a sample scene that is the same as what we have open, but it doesn't really matter for that. That's fine. So we're just going to go ahead and click import. And it's going to move everything and open it up, kind of like unzipping everything and taking everything out of the package and creating those folders and putting those files in our project. So while that's doing that, we're going to start going over these windows fairly quickly just to give you a rough rundown of the layout. So first part is we have the main menu bar, right? Just like any typical program. We have File, Edit, Assets, Game Object, Component, Window, and Help. You can find a lot of things in the menu, even though there are shortcuts and other ways to get to those same menu options. So our next one is we have this kind of toolbar that goes across the top here. Once it's finished loading here, we'll get our move, rotate, and scale. A lot of times will be up here depending on which version. For mine, I kind of have it undocked right here. So a lot of times this toolbar will actually be across the top right here. But we have the pan tool, move tool, rotate, scale. We have the rect tool, and this is also the transform tool where we can have all of those in one, move, scale, and rotate. And we kind of have that in the rect tool as well. But either way, all right. So we'll just leave it on, like, say, the move tool. So this hierarchy window here, this is like our scene or level in which we can visually see everything. Right now we have a camera and a directional light. And we'll have further explanation on that. But the next, that correlates with our scene view where we can actually visually see that. This is like our actual level that we're going to be seeing the level or building the level in. And we have a few windows. We have the game window here. This is what the player sees, our game view. And then if you have the asset store, we won't be using that because Unity has changed it. But that is, if you have that, you can simply close that window out by right-clicking on it and close tab. So next up, we have the inspector. If we select something, let's go to our scene view here first. Whoops. If you double-click it, it makes it maximize as well. But if we select our directional light, and we have the move tool, you can see we can actually move the light here. And in the inspector window, we get all of our settings. Now, all game objects are going to have a transform component. This is what contains the position, rotation, and scale values for X, Y, and Z. And then we have this component specifically on this light that is the light component. This is what makes this object a light, is this component. Now, this component essentially is a script, and it has all these variables. So we've got the type of light, we've got color and several modes, shadow settings, and a few other additional settings, as well as at the very bottom, then we have add component, where we could add more components to this as well. Just like the camera, we have the camera component with the camera settings for that. So let's go now to our project window down here at the bottom. This project window is where we put all of our files, because in one game you might have multiple levels. So you're going to have different types of audio files and art and other assets. And so we're going to organize those in here for that. So these are where our actual files are. So they might not actually be in the certain levels or games, but they're all going to be located here together. So if we go into our scenes folder, you can double click that, we have a scene. You can't quite see all of the letters, but there's a zoom bar over here on the right side where we can make this bigger or smaller. So if we make this up, we've got a couple things, and we can see if we click on these files, this one says roads, and if you see here, we have, it's called roads.prefab. So this is a prefab or a prefabricated, right, a preset game object that's already been kind of put together. And those are actually in our sample race scene. So we can actually double click this sample race scene, and it says, hey, do you want to make changes to your sample scene, which is the duplicate is over here. And we're just going to say don't save because we haven't done anything. Now, it's ignoring the sample scene because it's opening up the sample race, and then we have our RaceTrack. Now, here to kind of move around for those that are new to the interface, we have move. This is for moving objects, but to kind of get around our scene view, we want to pan, and we can do that by pressing the middle mouse button, and we can pan back and forth. You can also do the scrolly wheel of your middle mouse button if you have a scrolly mouse where you can zoom in and out. And then we can also do Alt left click if you're on a PC. I want to say it's Option left click if you're on a Mac. But the Mac computers, you're going to have similar shortcuts. It'll be like Command, Option, and Shift. Whereas on a PC, we have Control, Alt, and Shift. So, middle mouse pressing or Alt left click or left drag, holding down Alt, I can kind of maneuver or orbit around my scene. And you can kind of see the eyeball icon changes here because that's the shortcut that I have. So this scene has already been set up for us. And if we click on something, so I clicked on this object and it's pulling up this group. So this object is under decor. And if I click on it again, it selects the actual object here, this barrier white. And you can see we've got several things on this object. We have the mesh, the 3D mesh. We have mesh renderer, which allows us to see the object. And then we have this component called mesh collider. And you can assign different colliders. And this is what is going to allow our player to collide with this object. This collider means this object will now collide. Now, we have to check is convex in order for this to work, in order for this to kind of predict the shape here. Or predict is not the right word, but it looks at the geometry and simplifies things to try to create a collider that's similar in shape for that. Then we have a material, which we currently have a gray material on it for that. Then if we take a look at our player here, which is floating in the air, we have some components on this, right? We have our transform component for our location, and we have the rigid body. So a rigid body, the main two things you need to know is this gives it mass and gravity. So we have a mass of 1, and then we have use gravity on. So if I were to playtest, it's going to have gravity, and because it has this box collider as well with that, it's going to fall and then hit the ground, and it'll be on the ground. And we can preview that by selecting play. And I have special settings so that we know that we're in play mode. And our camera, though, is not set up for this. It's not following our player yet, but it goes to where the camera is in the game, and now I could play test. And of course, there's nothing in the game yet, but if I go back to my scene view, you can see the car actually fell. And if I lift it up in play view, it falls. Now, if I do anything in play mode, typically, depending on what it is that you do, when I turn off play mode, whatever you did is not going to save. So I turn off play mode and you see, boom, everything goes back to normal. So when you turn on play mode, make sure you turn it off. Right, that's going to be the key factor here. So that was our brief overview of the interface. And now we're going to take a look at the player placeholder, the camera, which we're going to use Cinemachine really quickly to make it follow the player. And then we're going to write our movement script and kind of go over some quick basics of coding. So with the player, we talked about already the box collider that's on it, this green box. This allows it to collide with stuff, right? And we have our rigid body, which is giving it mass and allowing it to be affected by gravity. So let's get things rolling. Let's see, should we do code or camera first? I'm thinking that we need to do camera first because it's so quick. So let's jump into that. So to do our camera, what we're going to do is select our game tab here, and I'm going to click and drag it. And then when I drag it out, you'll see it's free. I'm still holding my mouse down, and I'm just going to drag it over and snap it to the side. So go ahead and do that too real quick. You'll see sometimes you may have to do part of the video, pause real quick, complete that step, and then play the video some more, and then pause, and then complete the next step. So here we have where we have our two views, where we can have our scene view and our game view. This is what our camera sees. Now, in order to get our camera following our player, Unity has a Cinemachine system that works great for this, and it's going to simplify. And there is a lot of functionality and a lot of cool things you can do with it, but let's just keep it simple. So the first thing that we need to do is go to Window and then Package Manager. Right here, we can install packages, whether it's paid for or free, that we can get set up in here. So we don't want to do packages in project. We want to do the unit registry. This is key because we're looking to install a package. So then we'll type in the search bar here, Cinemachine. So you do that, you'll find Cinemachine here, and we're going to click Install and run through installing it. So it's just going to sit here, do its thing installing, and then it'll let us know when it is done. Pop-up disappeared real quick, and we have it done. So we can close this out now. And then on older versions, and they may change it again, we had a Cinemachine main menu up here. But in this version, it's not there. And so you can always see, even if it's in a newer version or a different version, or they change it again, you'll be able to find it somewhere. It's essentially, Cinemachine has cameras that are going to be under Game Object. So if we go to Game Object, you'll see Cinemachine is here. But we can also, in the hierarchy, click the plus symbol, and you'll see Cinemachine is here as well. So what we're going to do is create a virtual camera. And you'll see we get this Cinemachine CM VCam 1. And I can zoom out of my scene here, and you can see the icon. And this camera is overriding our main camera. It's controlling it. So if we click on our main camera, you'll see we get a Cinemachine brain component, that the Cinemachine brain is controlling the main camera. And then this is our virtual camera settings. So the virtual camera, we have some quick settings really quick that just says, hey, follow what? Well, we could do two things. We could either drag the player object into here, and it's going to look at that transform. Or we could also click the circular dot in our scene tab, look for that, and being that we know it's called player, I could also just type in search the player. There it is. Double click it, and it loads it in. So either way that you want to do that, pick one of those and assign it, and you'll see we get our camera here. So now that I've done the follow, I'm going to drag the camera up just for a second. So I get the camera up here. So on the green axis, I just moved it directly up. Now let's try the look at. Now different versions, I've actually gotten different results for, I guess, updates that they have done. But we'll go ahead this time and drag in the player 1 into the look at. Now, you'll see now it directly looked at the player using that location. Now, we should still be able to move the camera, and it actually looks at the player. So if we want a specific view, except for when I move it forward, it is looking at the top of the car. So I might not want that. Now this look at, it has an aim settings down here. So we have aim in the inspector. We can open that up, and you can see our aim is this yellow dot. And the first setting, tracked object offset, we have X, Y, and Z. Now, when you have an understanding of where the X, Y, and Z are, it makes it really easy, right? So for those that are new, right, but you can see X and Y. X is red, Y is the green, and Z is the blue. So in the Z, I want to move this basically forward. So I just grab the Z, and in this case, it's kind of rotating that up in front of the car. So we've got that. We have some dampening here, which for now, we could just turn that off so it just purely looks at with no problems. There's also some body settings. And if you want to know more about Cinemachine and to look at these settings more thoroughly, you can actually hit the question mark here, and this will open the Unity manual reference for Cinemachine, for virtual camera specifically. So this, you'll see these on any of these components where you want to look up more information. You just click that circular question mark and you'll find more information. I don't use those as much anymore unless if they're doing updates, but in the beginning you probably use those a lot, just kind of getting used to the terminology and what's doing what for that. So we got our camera set up. Now if we click play, you'll see our car will fall and the camera is right on the player. Of course, no keys work, nothing is moving, but we got our camera set up. So you could turn off play and then position your camera wherever you'd like the camera to be. And there you go. So mess around with that and get that going. And then when you're done, come back and continue with the rest of the tutorial. So now what we want to do is to write a script and put it on the player to move the player around. We need to go and make sure that Unity is going to talk to Visual Studio. Now, it should be set up by default, but not always. But we want to make sure that Unity is talking to Visual Studio, which is what is going to be processing, compiling our code. So first, let's save. If you haven't done so, Control S will save our scene. There was an asterisk right here, but once you do Control S, that goes away. And so now we're going to go to Edit and then Preference. Excuse me. Getting the hiccups here. Woo! Yeah, so there could be a hiccup if you don't go to Edit Preferences and then External Tools. So then in our External Tools, you'll see our script editor here. This drop down, yours might say Open by File Extension. What you want to do is change that to Visual Studio. Now, it doesn't matter which version you're using, just as long as you have something there that's Visual Studio, you're good. Just keep it simple so it's not overcomplicated. It's just which program are you using to write code. We'll just go ahead and use the newest one here that I have installed, and we are golden. And then you can close that out. And at this point, I would also go ahead and go File, Save Project. Now, this is saving when we make project changes, our project settings. So if you hadn't made any changes, that's saved. And then our scene, Control S, saves our scene or our level, and we're good. So now, let's write a script and get our player moving, right? So what we want to do is typically, we can go back to our Assets folder, and I can right-click and create a folder. So again, in this project window, we'll right-click, create folder. And I'll name this Scripts. Boom. See, the icon currently in this version is grayed in the middle, showing that there's no files in there. Now, I'm going to double click that folder. And then in here, I'm just going to right click now and create a C# script. You can also do the plus and do C# script as well. Either way, we got a script. Now, you'll notice right away it's highlighted in blue. Don't click off, just leave it highlighted blue and name it. So we're going to name this Player Controller. Now, let's say I misspelled it or I want to change the name. Because commonly this happens when students are starting out, and it can be very frustrating when you're writing your first script and you can't even get it going. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to do rename. And let's say I fix the spelling or I just rename it. I'm just going to call it player. Now it gives you a preview over here on this side. And this preview, we can kind of see a preview of our script. And I can already see the issue. And I'll point it out real quick. But you see my script is called player. But inside of the script, where it says public class player controller, that was the name of the script. So right now, those don't match. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to select the player. And I'm going to say, hey, I want to put this script on the player. So I drag it in. You click OK. You do it again. Oh, okay. So we read the message. Can't add script component player because the script class cannot be found. Keyword here, script class cannot be found. Make sure that there are no compile errors. Well, we haven't even written any code, right? And that the file name and class name match. So our hint here is the file name and class name match. So we can't put it on our player, but we can edit it. So all we need to do is go ahead and double click the player script, and that's going to open up Visual Studio. Once that opens up, we have our interface here. Again, more interface stuff, right? But let's keep it simple. So the first thing is, this is really small. So down in the bottom left-hand corner, I have a zoom. So maybe for now, we'll make that 200. And we'll just make this full screen. Now, a couple things that we will note from here. At the very top, the name of our project will show up in Visual Studio. This is really cool. Lovely. And then it has decided to go white. My least favorite when it's really bright and is blinding you. But up at the top here, it'll say HotWheelsRacer. And that's our Unity project, right? It's recognizing that this is connected to our project. Now, let's go ahead and change the theme here. And what we can do, if I remember right, is Tools, Options. Aha! It's already in the General tab. The color theme is light. We're going to make that dark. Sorry about that. Bam! There we go. Much easier on my eyes here. So now, back to our interface here. So you'll see our script here highlighted in purple. It shows the name of our script. And it shows, if I put my mouse over it, the location. It is saved to my desktop in the HotWheelsRacer folder. And we can come through here and let's break down the script real quick. So lines 1, 2, and 3. These are namespaces. So a namespace is a group of pre-written code. Kind of makes things a little bit easier so we don't have to code everything from scratch. We're able to kind of partner and have some of these codes rewritten. We can also make our own namespaces, but we have some namespaces done for us already. So in this example here, you can see I've pointed out the namespace. So there's 2 in this example. So here we have, then going on to line 5, this is kind of the start where it gives us the public class. Another name for class is script. So it's kind of like saying public script player controller. This has to match the file name. So I need to change this back to player. And you'll see I get an asterisk at the top letting me know it's not saved. So if I do Control S or the floppy disk icon, we'll click save. If you have multiple scripts open, you can do save all of the scripts as well. So we have player, that's great. So then we have a comment here. So this allows us to write a comment. And we have a couple methods that come from Unity, which we'll talk about here in a second. So we're going to have our script name, right? Like we saw that public class and then the script name. and then we have the beginning bracket, curly braces, right? And then we'll have our variables, how many we have, and then we'll have methods and then instructions inside of those methods. And then we have ending with curly brace for ending our script. That's kind of a quick breakdown of the anatomy. So we're going to need a couple variables here, and maybe it'd be helpful to quickly jump into what is a variable and some examples. So what is a variable? How do you write a variable? And how do you define and then access that variable? So some basics. A variable is a container that holds data, and then we can manipulate that and use it for specific things. So in our script, we're going to start with some variables here, and what we could do is just right in front of this comment, hit enter a couple times. Now everything is tabbed over and it has a specific layout, so we want to leave that because we're going to have everything aligned vertically and horizontally together to have this nice organization, and so everything works well together. So the first thing when we're writing a variable, you have a variety of things that you can put, but there's a couple requirements. Number one is we have to put what kind of variable is this. That's the data type. So I'm going to need a speed variable for my player, and so we'll probably want decimal place numbers. You could always start with an integer too, but since we want not whole numbers, which is an integer, but we want decimal place numbers, that data type would be a float. And then we have to put our variable name. So kind of previously I went over just calling it speed, but a better example is you want to be very clear, and this is the player speed, and this is the proper format. Variables should always be lowercase, and if you have secondary words, you capitalize them. And then we could end our line of code there, and that's just declaring the variable. But we actually want to set that to 20, and I'm going to put in F because it's a float, and then a semicolon to end that. So I have assigned, not equaling, but I have assigned 20 to this variable. Now, if I save this, now that I've fixed my title, let's go ahead and put this on the player. So going back here into Unity, we'll select the player, so it's compiling and connecting with Visual Studio. We'll select the player, and we'll drag our script onto it. Now that I fixed those errors, as long as you don't have any new errors, it will let us drag right onto it. Now you'll notice this component, I can't see the player speed or the 20. It's just not there. And that's because we don't have an attribute, or we haven't made this also public. So either there's a specific attribute that we use professionally for this, or we could also, this is by default private already. So I don't have to write private because it is private. But if I want to see it in the inspector, just as a beginner, I could just simply make this public, would be a little bit simpler. Now, the bad thing about this is that this is also going to make this accessible by any other script. So I could have an enemy script change this, and there may be cases where you don't want that. Maybe not in this case, but that's, anyway, so public. So now let's go ahead and create another one. So we'll do float, and we'll call this one turn speed because we're going to be turning. So let me type this up, and then you could type it up as well, but 40 F, and you could put a decimal, it doesn't matter. But you want to be careful for the autocorrect. So that's good there. We'll save this. So you can pause the video, type that up, and then we save it, and then we're going to test it. So when we come in here, you'll see, oh, player speed is 20, but now you can see what I was talking about with the turn speed is still private, so it doesn't show up in the inspector. So, but you can see our variable is there. Now, if I overwrite this, let's say I change this to 30, the player speed is going to be 30, but that's not going to reflect in the script. So the inspector is going to overwrite what's in the script. And that's fine. But anyway, so we're going to go ahead and make this one public as well. And then we're going to need two variables so that we can assign buttons on our keyboard, which are inputs, right? The keyboard is an input, and then there's some specific buttons, or in this case, we don't just want to assign a button, we want to assign several buttons. But let's do that. So our variables for that, there are two of them. I'm going to write them up real quick. Okay, so you can go ahead and pause and write those up. Catch any spelling errors now would be better than later. So there we go. We got those in. Now, currently we're not going to need anything in the start. So we could actually delete this. And I'm going to delete this comment just to keep it nice and clean. So I'm going to leave one space. And then we have void update. Now update, this runs every frame. Now that could be an issue, right? If you have a slow computer, then that means you're going to be running this update slower than, say, a faster computer that has a lot of frames, right? A lot of gamers, you're looking at it when they're like, oh, my FPS is 250. And then somebody's, oh man, you know, my FPS is only 50, right? So, but there is a way that we can fix certain things that we'll talk about. But nonetheless, running every frame. The first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to get our inputs. So Unity has inputs already set up. And the location, if we go to Edit, and then Project Settings, we'll go to our Input Manager here. And see, Input Manager, we have the axes. And you see there are 18 apparently set up already for us. And we have horizontal. And you can see here, horizontal, the name of it is spelled a certain way, so don't change that. Just watch. And this is going to be the left negative button, the right is the positive button, and you can see we have A and D. And it's got some settings for the dead and sensitivity. And we can hover our mouse over here that it lets you know what those specific terms are. It also lets you know here we have the type can be key or mouse button, axis, x-axis, so on and so forth, right? But these are already set up for us. So we don't need the setup inputs. They're already there. We just need to get them. So how do we do that in this case? So in our Visual Studio now, back in that, the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to write in input dot get access. And you can see this wonderful IntelliSense with Microsoft Visual Studio. It connects the dots that this get access is actually comes from input. And if we hover over input, this comes from, well, you can see class Unity Engine. So the Unity Engine is a namespace that has scripts for, say, the input. That's how that works. So we can just say input get access. So that'll get the access. We don't want to just get one button. In this case, we want left and right. Right, so we're getting the access, and let's see, the first one we'll get, we put the name. So a string is a type of variable. And so all we have to do is put the string and the name of it. So to write a string variable, we're going to put the quotations, and then we have to write the variable. Now this comes from Unity, so it has to be spelled exactly the same. And so we'll do horizontal, and then we'll end that. Now, this gets the input, but it's getting it, and then it's like, okay, now what? Well, we need to assign this to a variable so we can use it for moving the player, and then we'll do vertical as well. So we're going to assign that to our variable horizontal input. Now you can copy and paste, right? Control C, Control V. and put that in, or you could just type it up from scratch. Either way. But we can also, if we just type it in, forward, it knows, oh, that's the variable. Is that what you're wanting? And I'm just going to press tab. So our forward input, I'm going to assign the input.getAccess. And that's going to be vertical with a capital V, right? C# is very picky. Capitalization makes it a totally different variable than lowercase. And also spelling. Then we need to put our semicolon. Now we've got those two variables. And now we need to make the player move. So last two lines of code, besides some comments, to actually get the player moving, we can type in transform, right? And you can see here, this gets the transform attached to the game object. And then we'll do dot. And there's different ways to make a player move. We could get the rigid body and we could add force. But another way is we can do transform dot translate. And that moves the transform in the direction and the distance that you want. And so here we have two parameters. We could put in the vector 3 for the translation and then the space. Right, so in this case, we don't need the space. We only need the vector 3. So we're going to do translate. And then this would kind of be the format. And then with translate, we need to have a vector 3. So we could essentially put in 0 for the x, 0 for the y. And you can see here's the format. Moves the transform, whichever axis. So on the x and the y, it will not be moving. And then in the z, it will move. Now, the problem with this is it's going to move in the z direction, but this is literally only one frame, 1 meter per frame. Because it's in update, it's going to run every frame, and this unit of 1, Unity uses meters. So this is going to move it constantly, but we're not able to control the movement. And so we could write this actually a shorter way as well, which is a little bit easier. So being that basically the x is left and right, the y is up and down, the z is going backwards and forwards. Okay, keyword forwards. -1 would be backwards. But there's an easier way to write this, or a shorthand for that. We could also just write vector 3 dot forward. And I kind of skipped it, but if you hover your mouse over it, you can see shorthand for writing 001. Use this all the time. So we have, now it's telling us the axis. This is the axis that it's moving in. It's moving in the Z, moving forward. Now, the next thing is, okay, it's moving in that axis, but we want it to be going this speed. And we also want the forward input because we want to control it with our keyboard, right? So to do that, we can times it by the player speed. So, right, you get 0, 0, 1. So 0 times 20 is 0, 0 times 20 is 0, and then 1 times 20 is 1. So only in the Z will it go 20. And that'll be per frame right now. But then we're also going to times that by forward input. And that is that it is going to basically mean that it's only going to be when we get the axis vertical, or else everything will be 0. Because 0 times 20 will be 0. So this forward input means when we press the up arrow or down arrow, or the W or S key, that is what is going to allow the player to actually move forward up to 20 at the moment. Now, the next thing that we want to do, though, is just kind of keep this near professional standard, and that is that this is running every frame, and this is a problem if you have a fast computer and a slow computer both playing the game. So we want it to actually run per second, so that way the time on each computer is going to be the same. And the way we can do this is we can just add in here and do another times, but we're going to times it by Unity has a time variable that we can use. So we're going to get the time script from Unity, and then we're going to use the delta time, and that you can read the technical definition, but this is essentially going to make this be per second instead of per frame. So even though it's running in update, this is going to convert it to only run per frame, or per second instead of per frame. Ha! Caught myself there. I'm going to exit out these other windows that we don't need at the moment, so we can have the full space. There we go. So then our next line, so that's moving the truck forward, and you could put a comment here if you want, or you could put a comment at the end. That would be really long, but that's for our movement, right? So next up, we want the car to rotate. So we get our transform, and we're going to use something called rotate. And this is going to apply a rotation around whichever axis we tell it to use. And the space. So for this, we're going to use, we want to rotate. And the shorthand is going to be vector3 dot up, and that is because we're rotating on the y axis, which is going to allow us to have the car rotate left and right. And then we'll put comma and then put in the angle. So that's the axis. This is just what are we rotating on, and then the actual rotation and angle and how fast it can rotate. So in that case, you know it's the turn speed, which we're going to times by the horizontal input, and then we can times this by the time dot delta time. And this is for our rotating the truck. Now, the cool thing about this is the horizontal input, the get access, when we press the key, because this is public, you'll see this in the inspector, and we'll be able to actually see when we're pressing the keys. So let's save this. We are done with this basic script for moving. We get back into our game. And just in case if you haven't done so, right, we're going to select our player 1 and make sure that you've put the script on the player script on the player. So you'll see here our player speed is 30 and our turn speed is 40, and these are going to be our inputs. You'll see the number change with a maximum value of either 1 or -1, because this is pressing the key. So if I turn on play, you'll see when I press the right arrow, it goes all the way to 1 if I'm holding it down. If I let off, it goes back to 0. You saw, that's pretty cool how you can see it live, the numbers. So the forward input, if I do left, you'll see, oh, I'm sorry, horizontal still. Left arrow, you'll see it goes negative to -1, versus the other way was all positive. Decimal places positive all the way to +1. Going to the right, and negative going to the left. And you could see this up here as well, the rotation. You could see it's all positive on the Y, but then if I go this way, so I could actually control it too. So going positive or going negative just by dragging on the Y. Then we press the up arrow, and we'll see the forward input go all the way to 1, and the back arrow going -1. You can see like the camera. So that's it. Play testing. So you can play test yours and see if you need to go back and change anything. For the final piece, just for setting up a level, so you could go in and make your own. I'll show you that real quick. But here we have, you can see these don't have colliders on it, so my player can go through it. Versus this one here, I can actually hit, and it bounces off, or kind of collides with it, right? So really cool here. Man. So we'd have to mess with this a little bit to kind of get that the way we want. Go to yourcreativedestiny.com. We have classes for 2D and 3D art, creating and editing artwork, as well as introduction to C# coding, the game development phases, making games, as well as how to launch and market your games. All right, so back to building our level. What we're gonna do is in our sample race scene, make sure you save Control-S and select our player 1. Now this is a prefab, we can tell because it's got this blue box icon and it's called player 1. But if we search for it, it's not showing up. It only pulls up the script. So we have it saved, but maybe not named right. That's fine. So what we're gonna do is we can just right now, let's go. We have it in our scenes folder. We should have a prefabs folder, but that's okay. So where we have our other prefabs at right here, I'm just gonna drag player 1 down here, boom. And we'll just create a original prefab. So it's creating a new prefab version of this so that we're good to go. We got an error in our console. We can just click clear. Those errors are all done. They're all cleared out. We're good to go. So we have our player 1 here now. Now we wanna save that as a prefab because we're going to save this Control-S, and then we're going to double click our sample scene, which isn't going to have anything in it, okay? So we can drag in our player, and we can even reset the transform, and you'll see it puts it at the origin of the world, and we have our camera. There's no Cinemachine, nothing set up, but I can just kind of move this over here and maybe even rotate the camera. Let's see, so we want to change this to local mode, and then we can tilt the camera down, press W, and move the camera up. So we got this view of our car and the ground plane. So we'll save this, Control-S, that's our sample scene. And you can rename this and reload the scene, but you want to save your scene. And what we can do is just slow double click or right click rename. And since I saved my scene already, Control-S, now I can name this and I'll call it My RaceTrack. And then because I renamed it, we have to reload. This is why you want to save already. But we'll click reload. It reloads the scene. There we go. We have My RaceTrack. Now what we can do is go into, say, our models folder. And we have some models in here. Like we got this sign here. That's pretty big. Maybe we'll want it that size. Maybe we don't. I don't know. But you can check through here and use these things. We got a cone. Yeah, that's a pretty big size there. So if we select it, we can see the import setting is actually 1 scale factor. This is pretty big for a cone. Let's try 0.1 and hit apply. Woo, okay, that's way too small. So maybe 0.5, and we'll click play. That's feels a little bit about right. I mean, we could make it bigger, whatever you want it to be, but that's the scale factor. Now this pylon, it's not a prefab at the moment, right? Because this is the import cone, but when I dragged it in here, it's probably like a broken prefab. But we can create our own prefab. So if we want to come in here and create a folder, we'll call it prefabs. We can go into this folder and we can create our pylon, drag it in here, create an original prefab. There is our prefab. Now, what we'd want to do with this maybe is to add some sort of collider to it. We could add a collider. Maybe we'll do circle. Nope, that's a 2D collider. So we can just type in collider and see. We do not want any 2D colliders. We could do a mesh collider if we wanted. I'm thinking just a sphere collider is nice. And we can do edit and see where the collider is. So maybe, let's see, the center, I'm going to bring it down a little bit. And the radius, I'm going to make it about the size of the cone. Now that's good to go, but these are changes that I made on this prefab. So if I click the one in the scene, it updated. If we edit the one in the scene, then you have to go to overrides and click apply all. So don't forget to do that if you edit it that way. But now I can easily just drag this cone in wherever I want it, and it's got colliders on it. So for the rest of the scene pieces, let's look at the urban folder, because this one's a little bit different. I think by default, these are all 2. And so I'm going to reapply that. So you could drag in one and see about the size of it. So let's, they're all reloading in. Let's do, we got this, think what would be a double road. Oops, I'm dragging in everything. Let's not do that. There we go. So I'll just bring this one in here. Let's rotate this. Whoops, 90. So we can see this should be 2 lanes, I think. But it's lower res. So if we select this and we can see the scale factor is 2, we can change this one. We could change, we're going to try maybe 5. And that's a little bit better. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we could do that. So that looks about right, maybe. Could make it bigger if you want. So I'm going to select all of these again, and I'm going to make all of these to be a scale of 5 and apply. So that way they'll all be that scale factor. So then I can drag in, whoops, and so each of these have arrows. When you open that up, you'll see it has a material, and then it has the actual 3D model, right? So this particular file is an FBX file, and that allows it, it's a 3D file that allows it to come with the material if it's extracted. And so here we go, we can just drag this in. We can see there's a pile of bricks. Now, maybe these ones are a little bit too big. We could change that. Detail cables. Looks like the transparency is not working on these ones. They need to be reset up. But you can see here we have our dumpster here. We've got pole. We've got some barriers. Could put a light here. And we could drag in some pieces here. So maybe we'll do this one 90. Now the key here for snapping all the pieces, because you don't want to sit here trying to line this up. That would just be really painful. So I want to show you a trick before we go, and you can build your own racetrack. But if you hold down V, as in Victor, you can move your mouse around and you'll see it'll grab certain points. And I'm not even clicking, I'm just holding down V. But what we want to do is I can then click, say, this point and snap it right over, right? Or I could snap the bottom one over. But either way, we get that in there, we can snap it in. And so now we have all these pieces that we could come in here and add in. And you've got additional pieces here for like sidewalk that we could do. So we could throw in some dirt. So the key here is with this one, I might want to snap this one to the bottom, or I could snap it to the top. But either way, if we want that lip up. Now here's where it's going to come into handy. So now you know how to snap, but what about the car riding on it, right? Right now, if I click play, the car is going to fall And that's because if you remember, the car has a rigid body for gravity and it has a box collider, but there's nothing to collide with. So let's find this asphalt here. So this asphalt here, we're going to want to add in a collider, and we could try either a mesh collider or we could do a box collider. And we quick play to play test it. And there we go. The car sits on it and we're good to go. So that means we're going to have to go through here and add those in. So for this one, we could add in, oh, let's turn off play. If you don't turn off play, it won't save your changes. So we'll do mesh collider for this one. And if we do is convex, it'll kind of predict. You can see for this one, it is not doing a very good job for this particular one, right? So how do we want to handle that? I would look through the colliders and see what might work best for that, so you can get that, test out these colliders, have a little fun with it, and see what you can do. You can set up 2 colliders on one object. So for this particular straight piece, I could add a box collider, and we'll do edit and bring it all the way over. Bam. Right, and then I would just add in another box collider. And shape this up where you want it. Now the problem is the bottom floor doesn't have a collider now though. So I could just put 2 colliders on here where I want it. And we want to save this as a prefab. So on my straight piece, I could drag down here, create an original prefab. This one is ready to go with colliders. And this one here, we could add a box collider and it fits it perfectly. And this road dirt tile, this is a tile piece. But anyway, we can create an original prefab. So these have colliders on it ready to go, but the middle area, the car will fall through. So really what I could do is I could just do a giant plane, which I had in the scenes folder, this ground. With this ground, if I drag that in, this ground has the grass texture on it, and it's parented. So you have the ground parent object, the grass is the child object, and it has the box collider on it, making it solid. And you can see it's a little bit lower, so we could put it at 0, but then you'll notice some glitching. So what I could do is do negative 0.00001. And then that's going to make it slightly, that's apparently not enough. Negative 0.0001. So maybe only 3 zeros, that works. We'll take out 1 more 0. That's, maybe it's, because this one, oh, this one, let's put this at 0 and see what that does. We may want to do this on our prefab here. So that's at 0. Our ground, we'll select our position Y. Is it Y? Yeah. Let's do, oops, negative 0.001. There we go. So just 2 zeros and we're good. Okay. So now our grass has that on there. And that's the basics of building a level. I know there's a lot there. But so currently, because of our tires and the actual car, We could add additional colliders as well so it interacts a little bit more. But that's something for you to mess around with and experiment and, you know, have at it. Build a creative, unique level, build a little city area that your car can explore. And in the future, you can take notes from videos and classes and be able to add in some quests or missions and different interactions in the game. So we look forward to seeing you next time.